This offseason has been one of the craziest we've ever seen in college football. That's largely due to the transfer portal. More players transferred than ever before, including some pretty big names. Today, we're going to be taking a look at the 10 teams that did the best in the transfer portal this offseason. Before we get to today's video, make sure to smash that subscribe button and turn on those notifications if you're new to my channel. If you're watching this video, odds are that you love college football, and odds are you aren't subscribed to my channel, so make sure to subscribe to one of the best college football communities here on YouTube. Also, make sure to drop a like on this video as well. It helps out with that YouTube algorithm and helps share the video with more college football fans. Plus, it only takes a second to do. We'll start with USC, who many consider to have had the best offseason when it came to the transfer portal, and it's hard to argue with that, as they added one of the top quarterbacks in the nation in Caleb Williams and one of the top wide receivers in the country in Jordan Addison. If you just stop with those two, they'd still be one of the best. But the Trojans also added a number of other solid pieces as well. They added former Oregon running back Travis Dye, who was literally all of the Ducks' offense last season. In 2021, he rushed for 1,300 yards with 16 rushing touchdowns, while also being their leading receiver with 46 receptions for 400 yards. They brought in another stud from Oklahoma in wide receiver Mario Williams, who was one of the top wide receiver recruits of his class. He finished last season with only 35 catches for 400 yards, but he'll likely take a big leap this season. They added Eric Gentry from Arizona State, a player who's widely considered to already be one of the top linebackers in the entire Pac-12. They added a pair of solid playmakers from Colorado in cornerback Mekhi Blackman and wide receiver Brendan Rice. Former Alabama linebacker Shane Lee transferred to USC after appearing in only 5 games in his last 2 seasons, but in 2019, he racked up 86 tackles with 6.5 tackles for loss and 2 forced fumbles. Stanford running back Austin Jones came over to be the backup to Travis Dye. In 6 games in 2020, Jones rushed for 600 yards with 9 rushing touchdowns. USC added a number of top-tier names during the offseason, but they did a fantastic job in adding some really solid depth as well. Alabama didn't bring in too many players from the transfer portal, but with their case, it's quality over quantity, as they brought in only 5 players. We'll start with Jamir Gibbs, who has a chance to become one of the top running backs in the entire nation. Last season for Georgia Tech, he rushed for 750 yards and caught 35 passes for 500 yards. He finished the season with 7 total touchdowns. They also added a pair of really solid wide receivers in Jermaine Burton and Tyler Harrell. Burton hasn't really lived up to expectations while at Georgia, as he's caught only 53 passes for 900 yards and 8 touchdowns in his 2 years, but he has a chance to potentially emerge as Alabama's #1 wide receiver. Meanwhile, with Harrell, he was one of the best big play wide receivers while at Louisville last season. He finished the year with only 29 catches, but he turned that into 520 yards with 6 touchdowns, as he averaged 30 yards a catch. Eli Rix was considered one of the top cornerbacks in the portal. An injury cut his 2021 season short, but as a freshman in 2020, he recorded 20 tackles with 4 interceptions and 5 pass breakups. He was 3rd-team All-American from the AP and was named to the SEC's All-Second Team by the AP. Ole Miss put together a solid portal that was led by some pretty big names. We'll start at the quarterback spot with Jackson Dart, the USC transfer. In limited action last season with the Trojans, he threw for 1,400 yards with 9 touchdowns. The Rebels also added a pair of really good running backs in Zach Evans and Ulysses Bentley. In 15 games with TCU, Zach Evans rushed for 1,000 yards with 9 rushing touchdowns. Over the last 2 seasons with SMU, Ulysses Bentley has rushed for 1,500 yards with 15 touchdowns while adding 40 receptions for 300 yards. Ole Miss also added some wide receivers as well in Jordan Watkins, Malik Heath, and Jalen Robinson. Last year for Louisville, Watkins caught 35 passes for 500 yards and 4 touchdowns. In the last 2 years for Mississippi State, Malik Heath caught 71 passes for 750 yards and 8 touchdowns. Finally, you have Jalen Robinson, who didn't see much action in 2021, but still had a solid season for UCF back in 2020. 2 years ago, he caught 55 passes for 1,000 yards and 6 touchdowns. They didn't just add offensive pieces, they also brought in former Iowa State defensive back Isheem Young. He was the Big 12's co-defensive freshman of the year in 2020. Last year for the Cyclones, he had 55 tackles, 2 interceptions, 2 pass breakups, and 2 forced fumbles. Texas is back, and they did a great job in the portal this offseason. The big prize was obviously Quinn Ewers, one of the highest quarterback recruits of all time, who came over from Ohio State. They brought in some weapons for him, most notably former Wyoming wide receiver Isaiah Neyor. After originally transferring to Tennessee, he flipped to Texas. Last season for the Cowboys, he caught 44 passes for 900 yards and 12 touchdowns. They added another wide receiver in Tariq Milton. During his time at Iowa State, he caught 99 passes for 1,500 yards and 7 touchdowns. Texas also landed former Alabama tight end Jaleel Billingsley. He hasn't quite met expectations so far, as he's totaled only 37 catches for 600 yards and 6 touchdowns over the last few years. The Longhorns completely reshaped their offense via the transfer portal this offseason. Nebraska looks to be a lot better in 2022, largely due to their successful offseason with the portal. We'll start at the quarterback position, where they added former Texas quarterback Casey Thompson. He threw for 2,100 yards last season and led the Big 12 in touchdown passes with 24. Trey Palmer came over from LSU, who might low-key be one of the fastest players in the entire country. He was timed at 10.42 in the 100-meter dash. Last season for the Tigers, he caught 30 passes for 350 yards and 3 touchdowns. They added another wide receiver in Isaiah Garcia Castaneda, who came over from New Mexico State. He had a productive season in 2021, catching 37 passes for 600 yards and 4 touchdowns. Omar Brown, a cornerback from Northern Iowa, was named the FCS Freshman of the Year and was a first-team All-American in 2019. His 2021 season was cut short due to injury, though. They landed one of the best defensive prospects in O'Shawn Mathis, who had a great career at TCU. He recorded 45 tackles with 7 tackles for loss and 4 sacks in 2021. That followed a breakout campaign in 2020 when he led the team with 9 sacks and was second on the team with 14 tackles for loss. Quietly, South Carolina put together a really good offseason as well. We'll start at the top with Spencer Ratler, who left Oklahoma after losing the starting job to Caleb Williams. We know the talent is there with him, and maybe a brand new opportunity will help him turn into a Heisman candidate. They brought in some really good weapons for him as well. We'll start with wide receiver Cory Rucker, who transferred from Arkansas State. Last season, he caught 60 passes for over 800 yards with 9 receiving touchdowns. They also added one of the top wide receivers in the FCS in former James Madison wide receiver Antwan Wells. In 2021, he caught 83 passes for 1,200 yards and 15 touchdowns. Spencer Rattler's former teammate joined him as well, as tight end Austin Stogner came from Oklahoma. In his 3 years with the Sooners, he's caught 47 passes for over 600 yards with 8 receiving touchdowns. They also added a running back in former Wake Forest running back Christian Beal. Over the last 4 years for the Demon Deacons, he's rushed for nearly 2,000 yards with 14 rushing touchdowns. South Carolina also added some key pieces on defense as well. Terrell Dawkins comes over from North Carolina State, where he had 9.5 tackles for loss and 2 forced fumbles in 2020. He didn't play much though in 2021. Devontae Reed comes over after a solid career with Central Michigan. Over the last 4 years, the defensive back has racked up 280 tackles with 7.5 tackles for loss, 3 interceptions, and 11 pass breakups. Oklahoma lost a lot of talent, but they also added a lot of talent via the transfer portal. They brought in former UCF quarterback Dillon Gabriel to replace Caleb Williams and Spencer Rattler. Gabriel missed most of the 2021 season with an injury, but he's proven to be one of the top quarterbacks in the nation when he's healthy. Outside of Gabriel, most of their additions actually came on defense. Cornerback CJ Colden comes over from Wyoming. In his time with the Cowboys, he racked up 115 tackles with 16 pass breakups. Defensive lineman Jonah Laulu comes over from Hawaii. Over the last 3 seasons, he's totaled 70 tackles, with 19 of them coming for loss, along with 8 sacks. Defensive back Trey Morrison comes over from North Carolina, where over the last 4 years, he's racked up 160 tackles, with 11 tackles for loss. He also has 15 pass breakups to go along with 2 interceptions, a forced fumble, and a fumble recovery. Jeffrey Johnson comes over from Tulane, where he totaled 135 tackles, 15 tackles for loss, and 10 sacks during his time there. Finally, they added linebacker T.D. Roof. Last season with Appalachian State, he totaled 67 tackles with 10 tackles for loss, 3 sacks, 2 interceptions, a pass breakup, and a forced fumble. We'll get to another Pac-12 team with UCLA. They didn't have a player that was a major splash like a lot of teams, but they still added some really solid names. They added Duke wide receiver Jake Bobo, who caught 74 passes for 800 yards last season. Former Hawaii linebacker Darius Muwasa transferred after 3 years with the Rainbow Warriors. In his time with Hawaii, he totaled 270 tackles with 26 tackles for loss and 11 sacks. Last season, he had 14 tackles for loss with 7 sacks, including a 75-yard pick 6. He also broke up 4 passes and had 5 forced fumbles. UCLA also added a pair of twins from North Texas in Grayson and Gabriel Murphy. We'll start with Grayson, who had 38 tackles with 14.5 tackles for loss, 8.5 sacks, and 2 forced fumbles last season. His twin brother Gabriel had 12.5 tackles for loss, 7.5 sacks, 3 pass breakups, and 2 forced fumbles. Up next, we have LSU. They added former Arizona State quarterback Jaden Daniels. He was solid during his time with the Sun Devils, but I'm not sure if he's going to win the job over Miles Brennan. They also added former Louisiana wide receiver Kyron Lacey. In his last 2 seasons, he's caught 50 passes for 700 yards and 10 receiving touchdowns. They also added former Penn State running back Noah Cain. In 23 games with the Nittany Lions, he rushed for 800 yards with 12 rushing touchdowns. A lot of the moves they made were on defense, and we'll start with former Missouri defensive line Mekhi Wingo. Last year as a freshman, he totaled 27 tackles with 2 coming for loss. He had a 40-yard pick 6 as well. Former Oklahoma State cornerback Jared Bernard transferred in. During his tenure with the Cowboys, he racked up nearly 200 total tackles with 7.5 coming for loss and 4 sacks while adding 2 interceptions. He was a ball hog as he broke up 24 passes, including 11 in 2021. Defensive back Greg Brooks came in from Arkansas. During his time with the Razorbacks, he totaled over 100 tackles with 1 interception, 2 fumble recoveries, and 4 pass breakups. LSU added another cornerback in Mekhi Gardner from Louisiana. During his 2 seasons there, he had 16 tackles and broke up 15 passes. One final cornerback they added was Ohio State cornerback Sevyn Banks. During his time with the Buckeyes, he had 43 tackles with 1 interception while breaking up 10 passes. We'll wrap up our list today with Miami. They added former Ole Miss running back Henry Parrish Jr. In his 2 seasons with the Rebels, he rushed for over 800 yards with 5 rushing touchdowns with nearly 30 receptions. Most of their moves came on defense, starting with former UCLA linebacker Mitchell Lagude. In 2 seasons with the Bruins, he totaled 78 tackles with 14.5 coming for loss, along with 6 forced fumbles and 3 pass breakups. They added another UCLA linebacker in Caleb Johnson. In his 2 seasons with the Bruins, he totaled 90 tackles with 7 coming for loss, to go along with 2 interceptions and 3 pass breakups. Former West Virginia cornerback Daryl Porter Jr. had a great freshman campaign in 2021. He had 46 tackles with an interception and 5 pass breakups. Miami added another standout from West Virginia's defense and defensive lineman Akeem Mesidor. Over the last 2 seasons, he's racked up 70 tackles with 15 tackles for loss and 9 sacks. Finally, Miami also added defensive lineman Antonio Moultrie from UAB. During his time with the Blazers, he racked up 116 tackles with 10 coming for loss. He also added an interception and broke up 3 passes. Well, those are the 10 teams who had the best transfer portal this offseason. Which team do you think had the best overall? Or was there a team that I didn't include on this list that should have been mentioned? Let me know in the comment section down below. Before you leave, make sure to smash that subscribe button and turn on those notifications if you're new to my channel. If you love college football, then this is definitely the place for you. Also, make sure to drop a like on this video as well. It helps out with that YouTube algorithm and helps share the video with more college football fans. Plus, it only takes a second to do. As always, thank you guys so much for watching, and I'll see you all in my next video.